In the previous session, we worked on getting some general musical ideas down, and listening back to it, okay, it's not going to put Beethoven to shame, but it's an idea nonetheless, and something that we can certainly develop further upon. With these initial ideas scribbled down, we can now move on to something more serious and start programming a drum loop. Unlike our pre-programmed general MIDI kit that we used in the previous session, that was just to get our ideas down, we always like to get the drums down exactly as they will sound when the track is complete. There's a number of reasons for this. Firstly, drum timbres, they're pretty generic and don't typically evolve. What I mean by that is whereas there are a million ways that a lead timbre, a bass timbre, synth strings and so forth could sound, essentially, when push comes to shove, a kick is a kick, a clap is a clap, a hat is a hat, etc. Now, I'm not suggesting that every music track in the world uses the same drums, rather that they're all short, transient sounds that sound just as you would expect to hear them: a thud, a click, hiss, clap. Secondly, and perhaps most importantly, the drums form the foundation of the entire record. Dance music relies on groove, and groove is something that is first defined through the drums. You wouldn't expect a building to stand on dodgy foundations, and the same goes for any dance track. You can't expect the song to hold itself together when it's sat on a dodgy sounding drum loop. For the drums in every production we've pretty much ever done, we've always refrained from using sampled loops. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with using a sampled loop, and if that's the way that you like to work, then that's absolutely fine. It's just that unless you cut the drums up into individual timbres, which can be incredibly difficult since the hi-hat may be playing over the snare or clap, shakers could be playing over a kick, you're pretty much stuck with the loop mixed as it was by the original producer. This doesn't give you much freedom later when it comes down to mixdown. Therefore, we tend to do all our drums in MIDI. For our drum programming, we use a program called Ultrabeat. Now, this is Logic's own drum sampler. I can already hear users of other sequencers shouting at the monitors, but for those who aren't using Logic, Native Instruments Battery or Limplug's RMV does exactly the same thing that we use the Ultrabeat for. In fact, we did actually used to use Battery, but we had a few stability issues on our Macs, so we ended up turning back to Ultrabeat. Ultrabeat is essentially a drum synth and a drum sampler. It allows you to not only program your own timbres using its onboard engine, but what we mostly use it for is to import samples of drums, and then you can edit them further with the envelopes and filters that it has on board. We have individual Ultrabeats sat on every drum channel sat up here. For example, our Ultrabeat clap here, it's unsurprisingly full of clap samples. We also have one for hi-hats that's full of hi-hat samples. Kick, obviously full of kick samples, and so forth. It's all pretty self-explanatory, really. I should point out, however, that if we look at this Ultrabeat kick bank that you see here, perhaps unsurprisingly full of kick drums, if you listen, it does consist of more than just kicks. Now, the brighter timbres you can hear there, we've included them deliberately because we often use them to augment the kick further, to help the initial transient pull through a mix. Now, I've already mentioned the importance of transients in an earlier session, and never underestimate them. You'll find us constantly referring back to the importance of transients throughout this entire tutorial DVD. Now, sometimes, particularly with trance, the very transient of the kick can become lost in the mix. Sometimes this happens whilst you're still programming the drums. Other times it becomes apparent when you're programming other elements, or even sometimes it doesn't appear until mixdown when the kick seems to be lost in the mix. By adding one of these very bright timbres to the very front of the kick, it can really help it pull through the mix, and it can make an absolutely vital difference to the entire mix. Of course, depending on the tuning of the kick, depends on whether we'll actually use these samples here in Ultrabeat, or we'll load in a hit hi-hat sample, or numerous other things from outside Logic. Anyway, all the samples in each Ultrabeat bank are things we've collected from various sources over years and years. Old records, new records, sample CDs, synthesizers, Some we've programmed ourselves on the Waldorf Attack and other synthesizers. We've even gone outside and recorded kicking a ball against a plastic dustbin. As I mentioned at the very beginning of this DVD, we're not going to go into how to program drum timbres or how to use a sampler. Really, this is something you should already be familiar with. If you're not, I strongly suggest rereading my book, The Dance Music Manual. This covers all the fundamentals of dance music, and it will be vitally important that you do understand the fundamentals of the music before watching this DVD. As you can see down the left hand side, we have the kicks, the claps, the hats, and shakers. Now, I imagine some are wondering why we have no snares in this list. Well, we do have an Ultrabeat full of snares, but more recently we tend to lean more towards using claps than snares, so nowadays we always tend to open a project with claps in. The benefit of using Ultrabeat, of course, is that later down the line, if we decide to use snares, we can just swap out the clap Ultrabeat with the snare Ultrabeat, and straight away we have snares in the right place. On that same note, while we'll always use kicks, open and closed hats, we don't always use shakers, but we tend to include them anyway, just in case. We more often than not tend to program something with them to see how it helps the rhythm section, and then if it doesn't work, we end up deleting them. If it does work, we keep them in. But you'll find that shakers can really augment a drum loop further. When you have your hi-hats, your closed hats in, shakers can really add that extra definition. So, let's start knocking some notes in. Now, we'll start with the kick, and all we have to do here is knock some notes in every beat of the bar. Just move over. And we'll copy them over. Oops. There. Now all we do is we move these up and down in pitch. Obviously, since drums are not chromatic, moving up and down changes the kick timbre. So we just continue to move up and down until we find a timbre that we feel is appropriate for this mix. Quite like that one. Yeah, I love that one. So let's move on to the claps and get some claps down. Again, a clap pattern, nothing spectacular here to begin with. Let's select them all, and as with the kick, we'll just move them up and down to try and find a timbre that suits. Yeah, that'll do. Now, claps always benefit from some reverb, so we'll add a bit here using Logic's own Space Designer. We already have some presets in Space Designer that we generally use, reverb thickness, spatial awareness, so we'll pop that in and just have a fiddle around here and get it sounding right for the mix. Now, if you've read the Dance Music Manual 2nd edition, you're probably all a bit overly familiar with these patterns, as I've discussed them in detail within the trance chapter, and basically we're going to end up using the exact same patterns that we discussed in the manual here. I should point out that this isn't cookie cutting, it's quite simply how the drums are in trance. It's part of what defines it as a genre. Listen to trance music and 99.9% of the music will have a kick on every beat, a clap or snare on every second and fourth, and a hi-hat pattern based on a 16th. So we're going to do the basic same thing here. I think they benefit from some echo a bit of echo, boys, just to complicate the rhythm a little bit, make it sound a bit more exciting. I advise against piling on 300 other patterns over the top without first listening to the extreme basics of the loop and figuring out how you can make the three basic parts the best they possibly can be. Once these are sounding great together, we can then move on. No, that's not bad at all, that's a nice rhythm there. Now let's get the open hats in. Again, this is a pattern that's been discussed countless times in the Dance Music Manual. That's not bad, but it's a bit thin, so we'll double that up. That's it. That's got more power to the rhythm. Yeah. We'll just move these around a bit and have reduce a few sides. We'll play around and have a little skip to the rhythm. Let's see. Just enlarge that out now to see what we're doing. We'll just add some of these, just add little skips to the rhythm, just see how it sounds just before the second. We'll just copy that over so it occurs every bar. Now, one thing I can hear is a reverse clap sweeping up towards the end of the bar. So let's add that now. We'll just copy that down. We'll name that reverse clap. And what we'll do is we'll delete out these extra notes so it doesn't occur every time the clap occurs. We don't need it every time. We've got a setting in Space Designer, which is as a reverse. is it? I think it's verb 4. And switch that on. Just set the volume down on that a little. Oh, that's not bad at all. That's added a bit more to the rhythm there. I think we can augment that a bit further with some shakers. We'll have a go with some shakers. Now we're already using a basic pattern for the other drums, so we'll need to make this a little more exciting. We'll start there. I think we'll do a triplet pattern. Oops. I'll put one there. Copy them over there. Then there. And over again. There we are. Move through and find a better timbre. Oh dear, let's turn that down a bit. Quiet, we'll need to gain that up a bit, I think. Just put some gain on that. I think a bit of echo boy on that, I think. Get the tempo. Let's try 16ths. Now, one thing I've noticed is the kick seems to have pulled back into the mix, if you can hear that. Now, a common mistake here would be to charge and increase the gain of the kick, or worse still, just jump in and try replacing it with another timbre. If we rushed in to change it, we'd upset the whole mix so far. So usually your first impression is the correct one. So what we'll do is we'll add a top to that kick. We can put a hi-hat timbre on top, and we'll use the EXS for that, this is Logic's own sampler. Where is it now? It's drums and percussion. All we're going to do is we're just going to add the 808 and get the hi-hat. The hi-hat timbre from it. There it is. Yep. Just a sample of an 808 hi-hat. Nothing special. If you've been collecting samples for any period of time, I guarantee you'll have around 700 of these sat around somewhere on one of your hard disks. Just tune it and balance it in a little. Now listen to the difference this makes. Huge difference, it's subtle, but it's enough to pull the kick through the mix there. one thing I can hear here is a click, like clickety, a clicking sound. Now I don't have an ultra beat for this, so let's see. We can use Logic's own ESP to create this click. So we'll copy this track down. We'll call this a tambourine. Turn these plugins off. We don't need them on. I'll call up the ESP. This is Logic's own instrument. It's nothing special. As you can see from the interface, it's just a simple subtractive synthesizer. We could program this same timbre on any subtractive synth, really, something like the Waldorf Attack. Just get a quick pattern in there. Nice. Let's shift that. It's still sounding a bit. That's better. That's it. We'll drop that down. Much better. It's just looking a bit of a rhythm there. I could just hear this clicking away in the background. Get rid of that. Just lower that release down, just get it short. Drop the K. I think a little bit of echo on that. It needs a little bit of echo just to help it float. So we'll copy that across. Pull that across, loop, and then I think that'll benefit from some velocity movements. Maybe some velocities around just randomly, just to get a general bit of a groove going in there. Hear the difference that velocities are making there. It's making the rhythm very different. Release all them. I'll just copy that across. Just open up the loop pointer there. Nice. Have a quick play around with them. A bit of echo on there, I think, just to help it gel a little. Don't need too much here, just a small amount. Just to give it a little bit of groove. I think it will benefit from some movement in the filter. It's called Filter Freak. I can use LFO to modulate the frequency of this, which will move in and out of the mix. So let's get that set first. Let's look out the frequency. sequences that we like, and then just sweep across the top of them. We'll edit this filter's movement now. Just a very slight movement there, but it does add. It adds a bit to that rhythm. Just a bit of a change as it flows along. It's just decay definitely. No need to go too mad here. We don't want to overtake the drum with this. Just small lines. Say that's pretty much there now. It's all grooved, it's all coming together. I mean, typically we'll spend a good number of hours programming a loop for trance. As you can see, it's not unusual actually for us to spend around a day doing exactly what you've seen us do here, starting by laying down the basics and then slowly evolving on those basics. So, as you can see, the drum now comprises of a kick top, clap, reverse clap, 3 open hats, closed hats, shakers, and 3 tamarines. It's built a pretty good loop that's gelling together well. One thing we do need to do at this stage, however, is create a sidechain track. Now, we're creating a sidechain track now because we've settled on our kick drum and we want to use that same kick drum to create the sidechain. We can later use this sidechain for compression, noise gauge, pumping. I'm unsure how this works in other sequences, but in Logic you start by bouncing down the kick drums. And then you bring that back into a new channel. Set the outputs to nothing so it doesn't actually come through the mixer. What we'll also do in order to keep this tidy, we'll hide this track out of the way for now so it doesn't become confusing, so we actually see 3 kicks. There we go. Right, now that's done, we can move on to the next session.